In 2008, when I was instructed to contact the terrorism division of the FBI in Memphis, the person that I spoke with asked me, first of all, did you agree? Because it had been billed as an experiment. And I said, no. He then said to me, well, we know whose chips are on. So then the question becomes, is everyone that is victimized by a person of that status chipped? Are they chipped deliberately so that they can be victimized?
You, Millicent, what's really valuable actually in that statement that you received it from the FBI, right? This statement of we know whose chips are on.
Correct.
That tallies completely with what the senior Swiss intelligence guy told me inside the military HQ of Switzerland. And he said, oh, I'm getting all the time reports of people being attacked with microwave weapons and saying that they've got chips in their head. And he basically confessed, although he didn't actually realize, and he also talked to me as if I had said I've got chips in my head. And I pointed out to him that I've never mentioned chips in my head in the entire conversation. It's hilarious because he blurted it out, the Muppet he was. And I never mentioned any chips, or certainly not chips in my head. And he started talking to me like as if I was one of those people who had just approached him with chips in my head. And I never mentioned it. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting, because turning it around, it sounds like to me, a lot of people here in the Switzerland have electromagnetic experiments done on them. So that's why they're being shot at with microwave weapons. And the real test is the chips in the head. That's the whole point of the experiment. How can we control the mind? Mm-hmm. And now combining it with your information, Millicent, on the other side of the globe, that the FBI says, oh, we know whose chips are on, is an admission that people, it's almost standard. There are lots and lots of people with chips all around, and they keep a log of whose chips are on and whose chips are off. So they cannot claim anymore that having chips anywhere in your body is at all unusual, because the FBI clearly keeps, log of them.
Yeah, and it's amazing, Millicent, that somebody actually said that to you. Because in actuality, when most people go to the police, and report things like electromagnetic weapons, or they go to their doctor and they say there's a weird feeling, in my head or in my left arm or in my ear, it's almost as if I'm hearing a noise. It seems as if I may have been covertly implanted. You use that word covert implantation, and what gets pulled out immediately is the whole psychiatric story. The psychiatrist is immediately called to give you a psych evaluation. Sometimes it's a 72-hour or a 48-hour, hold put on you. You're taken away to a hospital, and so this is across the board. This is exactly what they're doing. This is modus operandi. This is the system that they have set up, where psychiatrists are being called in, being pulled in as God. The demigod on the side. Bring in the demigod and point the spotlight at you and say you're crazy to have mentioned a chip in your head or your ear or your left arm. A chip you may have gotten from a vaccine, from a dentist, from a doctor during surgery, completely non-consensually implanted, etc. The very mention of the word chip in your head, and you're taken off to a psychiatrist. But here we have an FBI agent actually openly admitting that they're perfectly aware of chips in people's heads. And if I recall, Millicent, working with your case, there was also a police sergeant who said to you that many people, when they get caught in accidents on the freeway,
right,
and when they're taken to the emergency rooms by ambulances, there's a great danger of people being implanted. This was a police sergeant who said this to you.
correct.
Right?
That was Sergeant Jeffrey Taylor, who is no longer with the Mount Pleasant Police Department. Sergeant Taylor was also the one who told me that he had worked with the CIA while he was in Marines intelligence to do LSD experiments on the Vietnam veterans. And needless to say, many of those veterans were also labeled as mentally ill when they began to complain about what was happening to them as a result of those experiments. Something else that's important for me to share is in 1999, I spent a 2 week time at a retreat and in Ohio. And my therapist there said to me, um, the now I want y'all to know that my brain is being assaulted. Actually, I wish you could see my eye. My left eye is
Oh
droopy.
dear.
And when the left eye is droopy, that means that that side of the brain
Yeah.
is being worked on.
Yes.
But what he said to me is the programming is in your brainstem. Now, this was a psychologist,
Mhm.
and he said the programming is in your brainstem. So what that meant is there's a brainstem, a chip in our brainstem, perhaps yours, perhaps everyone's, read write programmable, whereby they are able to manipulate our behavior, our memories. They're able to induce symptoms of mental illness.
Mhm.
And this is being and can be done across the board. I read in 2005 that by May of 2005, everybody in this nation was supposed to have been chipped. How are they going to get the chip? Because they weren't asking us, can we put something in you? But that's exactly what I read. And so by 2005, obviously they were ready to go global
Mhm.
with all of the other things that's happening to us today.
And it can be done through a syringe, an injection, or a vaccine.
Absolutely.
And in fact,
Absolutely.
this is something somebody sent to me, was a heads up on this video, this conversation that Elon Musk had with a couple of people. I have to go back and look at who the interviewers were. But I looked at the little clip, and basically what he's talking about is, well, you know where Elon Musk comes from, right? He's a total transhumanist and a cyborgist. He's a cyberneticist. He's all about, hooking men up to machines, not just men, everybody up to machines, and so forth. And the thing that he was talking about was how he believed that we were very well. He acted as if it was in the future, but you and I know, we are in the present, and it's already
Absolutely.
happening, and it's already been happening in the past. He was talking about how a brain interface could be created in order that humans could share information more adequately. And he talked about input and output, which Catherine will know about, inputs to systems and outputs to systems, speaking of the human being and the human brain as a system, and saying that our inputs were pretty good because we had a good, strong visual interface connected to our brains. We could take in a great deal of information pretty well. But on the other hand, our outputs were very bad and very lacking because, we have just our two thumbs, and here we are trying to text, and we're not doing such a great job. So our outputs need to be worked on. And in order for all of this to happen, we need a brain interface. And so the interviewer said, oh, wouldn't that mean you'd have to cut open somebody's head and stick something in? And he said, oh, no, the thing is, we can actually, these days it can be done. And he mentioned the word neural lace. And he said it can be done with veins and arteries, with an injection, with a syringe. What is he talking about? He's talking about nanobots sent in through veins and arteries. But he doesn't really need to be talking about nanobots being injected because we are breathing the darn things through aerosols as well. So we are living in a time period where we are being assaulted with so much covert technology that people like Elon Musk are being very careful to kind of pussyfoot around and not speak openly about. But that information is here in military documents, and Millicent has certainly found a great deal of information. I have found a great deal, so have you, Catherine. We have all read the documentation, and we know what's actually coming down on, from the sky on us through these aerosols that we're breathing in, that's in our soil now, and therefore is in our systems, and in our brains.
Fine.
Already pushing us toward that era of absolute cyborgism and absolute transhumanism.
One
I
of the things, forgive me, after you, Millicent.
Oh, okay. I sent to you all recently a document that I found. It is a military document. It's entitled Biological Communication. In that document, it says that in 1922, Russia was able to achieve synthetic telepathy. And by 1926, they were able to achieve brain-to-brain communication. The United States Department of Defense came into that research, according to that document, in 1956. But 1922 is almost 100 years ago.
That's correct. A lot's been hidden.
We're already a cyborg. It's just that, I mean, you have a digital version of yourself or partial version of yourself online in the form of your emails and your social media and all the things that you do. And you have basically superpowers in that with your computer and your phone and the applications that are there. You have more power than the President of the United States had 20 years ago. That you can answer any question, you can video conference with anyone
Right.
anywhere, you can send a message to millions of people instantly. You know, you can just do incredible things. And but the constraint is input output. So we're I/O bound, particularly output bound. I mean, like your output level is so low. It's like, particularly on a phone, like your two thumbs are sort of tapping away. This is ridiculously slow. Our input is much better because we have a high bandwidth visual interface to the brain. Like our eyes take in a lot of data. So there's many orders of magnitude difference between input and output. So mostly, effectively merging in a symbiotic way with digital intelligence revolves around eliminating the I/O constraint. So it'd be some sort of direct cortical interface.
And you called it a neural lace?
Neural lace, yeah.
It's totally not Google Glass, right?
No, I'm talking about
No, but
something
it's
which...
like you wear it? Or you...
No, I mean, it would be... I mean, there are a few ways to approach this, but some sort of interface directly with your cortical neurons particularly.
But doesn't that imply surgical insertion?
Not necessarily. You could go through the veins and arteries because that provides a complete roadway to all of your neurons. Your neurons are very heavy users of energy, so they need high blood flow. So you automatically, with your veins and arteries, have a road network to your neurons.
Still some kind of surgery, right?
Yes, but you could insert something, basically, into the jugular and have. It gets macabre, but
it sounds really easy and
it doesn't involve
risk-free.
it doesn't involve like chopping your skull off or anything like that.
And also, the other thing that, an investigative journalist made a long expose about how Google was actually founded by the CIA and made by the CIA.
Oh,
and
yes.
Startup-y thing that was just a little show, It's like there was 30 years of DARPA research and into all this. And at the end, oh, yeah, some really nice teenagers, just made some startup and they just became amazing. It's like, no. A lot of really fucked up scientists and hardworking, postdocs worked for 30 years, put this together. There was oodles and trillions and billions of money pumped into it. And at the end, they put a gloss on it.
Yes,
true.
and they're being held up now. They show up at these TED Talks and they're interviewed by, people who are very well known and so forth. And then you have people like Regina Duggan coming along. She used to be the head of DARPA, right? And then she went to work for, was it Facebook or was it Google? I forget. Maybe Google.
Wow.
And then she's the one who's talking about the ingestible microchip. How it's going to be so fashionable, just like the electronic tattoo. We're all going to run out and get these, barcodes on the back of our heads because we simply want to be scanned everywhere we go. And we want to open doors with our hands. And, you do have these techno geeks out there, these, super techie sorts who think it's super cool. It's really, really cool to open doors with your hand, to submit to having your, this little space between your thumb and your index finger be implanted right there so that you can do anything with your hand. And this whole craze to be smart in every which way possible. So that's all part of the whole transhumanizing phenomenon that's being pushed our way.
What's so concerning about all of that, Romola, is, you know, by the time they announce it or by the time they put it on the open market, it's already been in use for 30 years. And they don't tell us that. So then who's been using it for 30 years? They've been causing us to ingest this stuff in pills, in liquids, in so many forms, and we not know it anyway. And so that's concerning.
På et sykehjem I Stryn sitter Erling, døv og taus. Før Erling forsvant inn I seg selv, påstod han at en lege hadde montert antenner I hodet hans. Erling sa til og med at han hadde forsøkt å rive antennene ut. Erling sa det var sem-jacobsen som la inn antennene. Sem-Jacobsen død, men hvem var han? Sem-Jacobsen var berømt. Han forsket på den menneskelige hjerne, og hadde ry som en av verdens fremste på sitt felt. Blant annet var han aktiv I USAs romfartsprogram. Minneveggen til sem-Jacobsen var fylt av hilsener fra astronauter han hadde jobbet med. Her på Gaustad møttes altså en innesperret pasient og en berømt lege. Året var 1961, og legen hadde all makt. J Isdahl har vært sjefspsykolog ved Gaustad sykehus. Han har gransket forholdene.
Gaustad var et meget lukket miljø, hvor pasientene var til for systemet.
Ikke omvendt?
Nei.
Pasientene var til for systemet?
Ja.
I arkivet til Helsetilsynet finner vi kopi av et brev hvor sem-Jacobsen søker et amerikansk fond om penger. Han skriver at I Norge kan man operere på pasienter uten pasientenes samtykke. I Norge saksøker ingen pasienter sykehuset.
Dette arbeidet blitt utviklet med stor støtte fra det amerikanske flyvåpen og Federal Aviation Agency.
Han fikk amerikanske penger. I flere arkiver finner vi kopier av forskningskontrakter sem-Jacobsen inngikk med hæren, marinen og flyvåpenet I USA. På begynnelsen av 60-tallet fikk han minst 3 millioner kroner for å drive forskning for Pentagon. Dette tilsvarer 22 millioner kroner I dagens pengeverdi. Allerede I 1956 bygget sem-Jacobsen et eget laboratorie på Gaustad. Det gikk fort, takket være personlig engasjement fra helsedirektør Carl Evang, sosialminister Gudmund Harlem og statsminister Einar Gerhardsen.
Og slikt avansert laboratorium har vi ikke hatt I psykiatrien, hverken før eller siden.
I dag laboratoriet revet. Bare sementsporene I veggen tilbake. Sem-Jacobsens arkiv også blitt borte. Vi må tilbake til Erling. Av sykejournaler ser vi at det ble gjort inngrep I Erlings hode. Men hva slags type inngrep var dette? I flere arkiver finner vi spor av sem-Jacobsens forskning. På denne tiden eksperimenterte sem-Jacobsen med å legge elektroder inn I hjernen. Kirurger boret hull og plasserte elektrodene ned I de dypere lag. På denne måten kunne sem-Jacobsen måle hjerneaktiviteten og sende inn svake strømimpulser. Han lot elektrodene ligge inne I hjernen I uker og I måneder. Praktisk løste han dette ved å montere koblingsbokser på pasientenes hode. Boksene gjorde det mulig å koble pasientenes hjerner til apparatene når det skulle passe. Kanskje var det dette Erling kalte antenner, og som han forsøkte å rive ut. Da Erling slapp ut av sem-Jacobsens laboratorie I 1961, hadde han endret personlighet. Familien forteller at Erling var blitt sky, paranoid og sint. Året etter ble Erling lagt inn på nytt. En ny lege lobotomerte han. Det ødela alt. Erling ble gradvis mer og mer stille borte ved vinduet. I all hemmelighet ble det drevet et storstilt eksperiment. Flere tusen unge amerikanske soldater og sivile ble utsatt for biokjemiske forsøk. Forskerne fikk i oppdrag å finne ut om stoffer som LSD, meskalin, BZ og englestøv kunne brukes i kjemisk krigføring, og om stoffene kunne få noen av USAs mest disiplinerte soldater til å handle mot sin egen vilje. Og her dukker sem-Jacobsen opp. Under andre verdenskrig jobbet han for den amerikanske etterretningsorganisasjon OSS, forløperen til CIA. Etter krigen ble Carl Wilhelm sem-Jacobsen utdannet i Minnesota i USA, og i 1954 var han med på å teste ut LSD og meskalin på pasienter. Sem-Jacobsens oppgave var å måle hvordan stoffene virket inn på hjerneaktiviteten til pasientene. Den kanadiske forskeren Wilder Penfield var en av autoritetene innen hjerneforskningen. Han forsøkte å endre folks bevissthet gjennom elektrisk stimulering.
During my life as a brain surgeon, it has been necessary to operate on a good many men and women, a good many hundreds, and to expose the brain under local anesthesia with the patient conscious.
Electrode 8 is in the bed of the amygdaloid removal.
Penfield samarbeidet tett med sem-Jacobsen. José Delgado var en spansk forsker som sa han drev med elektroniske leketøy. Delgado opererte elektroder inn i hjernen på okser og koblet dette opp mot en fjernkontroll.
Dette er vitenskapshistorie, da, at han hisset opp en okse, og oksen kom imot han rasende, og oksen hadde da fått implantert elektroder, og det var bare en kort vei mellom forskeren og oksen, og han slo på knappen, og oksen stoppet og virret bare rundt, og visste ikke hvor han skulle gjøre av seg.
Delgado has remote control of the animal.
Men var det dette de drømte om? Sende impulser og kunne styre mennesker?
Ja.
Den norske ingeniøren Per Hals laget elektronikk for Delgado. Han sier Delgado og sem-Jacobsen samarbeidet.
Og deres felles interesse var jo da registrering og stimulering av hjernen for å finne ut hvordan den fungerer.
Og det interesserte både Delgado og sem-Jacobsen?
De var de begge to interessert i.
Delgado brukte dyr. Han la koblingsbokser i hodet på apekatter. Det samme som sem-Jacobsen gjorde med mennesker.
Det er samme type apparatur, ja. Det er det jo. Men Delgados var vel atskillig mindre enn det sem-Jacobsens var. Og litt mer spesialisert fordi at han ikke skulle ha signaler fra så store deler av hjernen som jeg tror sem-Jacobsen kan ha vært interessert i.
Et stort prosjekt gikk ut på å kontrollere folks atferd gjennom å kontrollere deres hjerne fysisk. gjerne via elektroniske koblinger på lang avstand, men på en sånn måte at folk ikke selv visste at de ble kontrollert.
Så poenget med at menneskene som ble utsatt for dette, ikke forsto hva de ble utsatt for?
Det er hele poenget.
Og ganske riktig. I en av sem-Jacobsens publikasjoner dukker det opp en oversikt over 82 pasienter på Gaustad. De fikk elektroder lagt inn, ble stimulert og opplevde disse reaksjonene. Målet var altså å finne ut hvordan man kan endre menneskers adferd. Norske myndigheter har åpenbart støttet arbeidet aktivt. Vi har en rekke historier om hvordan sem-Jacobsen suverent kunne rekvirere militære fly, laboratorier, ja hele militære anlegg i Norge. På marinebasen Håkonsvern utenfor Bergen stanset sem-Jacobsen hele dykkerskolen hver gang han ville drive eksperimenter. Sem-Jacobsen limte elektroder fast med aralditt.
Noen små kontakter som vi hadde festet til hodet.
Og målte soldatenes hjerneaktivitet mens de var i trykkammer. Han sa han målte soldatenes sjelsliv, forteller dykkerlege, kommandørkaptein Svein Eidsvik.
Sjelslivet da kokte ned til noen mikrovolt, noen milliampere, og noen metabolitter og noen elektrolytter.
Og han mente at han kunne lese sjelslivet til folk?
Ja, mente han.
Gjennom disse apparatene?
Ja da, det gjorde han.
Sem-Jacobsen hadde en høy militær grad i USA, noe som er uvanlig for en utlending. Han hadde også fri adgang til noen av USAs best bevoktede flybaser. Det er høyst uvanlig. Og en ting til. En stor del av pengene han fikk kom gjennom Ford Foundation, et fond som i mange år ble brukt til å kamuflere utbetalinger fra CIA. Dette er Den sorte dame. Den amerikanske etterretningsorganisasjonen CIAs spionfly, U-2. På slutten av 50-tallet benyttet U-2 Bodø som mellomstasjon under sine turer innover Sovjet. U-2 er i dag historie, og henger på Flymuseet i Bodø. Oddmund Bjørnåli er kaptein i flyvåpenet, og kanskje Norges fremste ekspert på U-2.
Rent teknisk sett så ble det utviklet et system på slutten av CIA sin bruk av U-2 for å kunne overvåke og eventuelt påvirke flyveren.
Bjørnåli har møtt sem-Jacobsen og er overbevist om at han valgte ut piloter og laget utstyr for U-2.
Resultatet av hans arbeid ble brukt i programmet.
I U-2-programmet?
Ja, det må det ha vært. På slutten spesielt. Ikke i begynnelsen. Mens definisjonen det av flyvere, hvem du skal plukke ut, ja, det har det allerede tidlig vært. Sannsynlig for.
Der har han også vært med?
Det må sannsynlighet ha vært for. Men
når du har litt forbehold nå, så er det fordi du ikke har papiret?
Korrekt, det er det. Jeg har ikke noe papir som sier dato og sted hvor han har vært til stede. Altså.
Det hjelper ikke at kaptein Bjørnåli er overbevist. Alle papirer omkring hvem som deltok i U-2-operasjonene er fremdeles hemmeligstemplede.
En uanet oppblomstring av den medisinske forskning takket være romfart og luftfart.
I think all of us have seen that, the influence of this remote neural tech on people around us. And what is this remote neural tech? I mean, it could start with these chips that people don't know that they've been injected with, that Elon Musk has kindly told us can simply be injected through your veins and arteries and can end up in your brain. Or it can start with nanotech and perform the same function as a chip, literally working as a nanochip, you know, or a network of nanochips in your brain. And then all of this becomes susceptible to radio hypnosis and to radio waves the chips in our brains are connected to the radio soup that we're living in and deliberate radio frequencies that are pumped at us, right? So with this methodology of using directed energy, directed radio waves in specific formulae, directed at our brains and directed at those chips, they're actually able to influence all of us now. We may all be chipped at this point in time. We may all be either microchipped or nanochipped, you know, and we're talking about brain chips. We may all be neurochipped at this point in time. And this is no longer speculation or delusion or paranoia or fear. It's fact based on the state of sci-tech today. You know, the state of covert sci-tech that's been kind of slipped over on us, on all of us. So we're all susceptible to neural influence at this point in time.
Et stort prosjekt gikk ut på å kontrollere folks atferd gjennom å kontrollere deres hjerne fysisk. Gjerne via elektroniske koblinger på lang avstand, men på en sånn måte at folk ikke selv visste at de ble kontrollert.
Så poenget at menneskene som ble utsatt for dette ikke forsto hva de ble utsatt for?
Det er hele poenget.